Welcome to tonight's Diabetes Chat. It is Monday night, and tonight we have the amazing Kes as our guest speaker. And Tony is here with me this evening, who will be co-hosting this chat. But you guys are more than welcome to join. So you can hashtag Diabetes Chat. You can join the panel alongside the guys that are listening and on the panel already. Or you can also go to our website, diabeteschat.net/hangout, and there's a little chat service there that you can write anything you want on there. But if not, just sit back, grab a cup of tea, and enjoy the next hour or so with myself, Tony, Kes, and everyone else who wants to come join the discussion. I'm going to hand over to Tony, and I believe he's going to introduce our Kes.
Yes, so tonight's guest is our very own co-host for Diabetes Chat, Kes Fuller. Kes originally wanted to join the Royal Navy, as it's always been something that she wanted to do from their time in the Sea Cadets. As time went by, Kes was unable to do this as she became increasingly unwell. This led to Kes becoming a social worker in 2013. Kes has worked at 3 different local authorities in the South, and Kes is passionate about education issues, SEND and mental health. She's also a practice educator and assessor. Kes was originally misdiagnosed with type 2, which is something that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, and became increasingly unwell, as tends to happen with a misdiagnosis, and was eventually diagnosed with type 1 in July 2019. She started with Humalog mix 1 week before travelling abroad to Tunisia, and switched to bolus and basal Humalog and, I've never heard of this one, Abasaglar, I think that is. And then over to Fiasp and Tresiba, and now a Fiasp pump 789G Looping Guardian 4. I hope I'm saying all of that correctly. Tonight we'll be learning more about Kes and her diagnosis of type 1, her career as a social worker, and we'll be talking about peer support, mental health, and lots more. Kes, how are you?
It feels really weird being talked about. I'm used to talking about other people, but yeah, good. Good.
The spotlight's on you tonight,
Excellent.
Kes.
I know, right?
No pressure.
What have you let yourself in for?
To be fair, you've done a brilliant job, because you helped me out by sending out the introduction. So yeah, you've pretty much done all the questions for me tonight. So I'm liking this guest. She's very organised, and she's helping us out. So keep it up, Kes.
Yep, so I will keep this train going. It will be a bit strange as Stu being on the other foot, given that you've hosted a couple of times, but I think it's really important that people get to know the hosting team as well. And everyone's story is unique, and sort of everyone's got something to bring to the table and sort of unique perspectives. So we'll start off like we usually do with our 90 seconds sort of quick fire introductory questions. So we know, of course, your name is Kes, and we've spoken a little bit about your occupation. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I'm a children and family social worker, so frontline child protection, and I've done this for 10 years.
Wow, that is a long time.
Yeah.
So the next one is a little bit about your diagnosis, which we've covered a little bit, but given that you've said about being misdiagnosed, it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about that. So when were you diagnosed initially, and then of course re-diagnosed, and how old were you at the time?
I've forgotten when I try. To be honest, I think I've got a little bit of PTSD about the misdiagnosis, so I don't remember exactly when. But I know I was in my 20s, and all people kept saying to me is, "Oh, you're too young to have type 2 diabetes," which was really unhelpful, to be honest. Yeah, so there was that, and then I spent about, 6 years maybe, getting increasingly more unwell until my diagnosis was changed in 2019. Yeah.
Wow, it's a really, really interesting story that I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. And I know Tom will sort of cover that in a lot more detail later on. Let's talk a little bit about technology. Do you finger prick or use smart technology?
Yeah, I do use technology. So I use the Medtronic 780G pump with Fiasp, and I'm closed looping with the Guardian 4 sensor.
Okay, and then this next question is to test if the guest speaker is a liar. When you finger prick, did you change the lancets every day?
No,
So we can
absolutely
now
not.
that Kes definitely tells the truth.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Okay, are you hypo and hyper aware?
Yeah.
And when you're hypo, what sort of symptoms do you have?
Generally, I feel a bit lightheaded, depending on how quickly and how low. Sweaty and shaky, and really hungry.
And then what would be your go-to hypo treatment?
I think it's still Jelly Baby, sadly. Although I hate them now, it still is Jelly Babies.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You almost get a negative association with your go-to hypo treatment. And then what do you think is worse, to feel hypo or hyper?
For me, it's feeling hyper, but just because of the anxiety around it, because I was living hyper for so long. That's a real issue for me. I know how to
Yeah,
deal with a hypo. Like, I didn't know how to deal with being higher for a long time.
yeah, that is really, really interesting actually way to put it, because you would have been pretty much hyper 24/7
Yeah.
with no effective way to deal with it. What is one thing that you don't like about diabetes?
Probably I think there's two things. I think it's the lack of awareness amongst the general population about different types of diabetes, and also the inconsistency in support across the UK in general for things like technology, mental health support, eating disorder support, all things really,
Yeah,
support wise.
yeah, absolutely. And what's one thing, if there is anything, that you like about diabetes?
Community, 100%. The peer support's great.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with you there. A bit of a more fun one now. Do you love or hate the smell of insulin?
I actually quite like it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, but then I quite like the smell of petrol. Is that weird as well? Probably, I don't know. But yeah.
Okay, and the last quick fire question now. If you were on a deserted island, what three things would you take with you?
Definitely a camera of some sort. I mean, I'm sure people have seen I quite like my photography. Probably a good series of books, and I don't know, what would my third thing be? Music. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I'm going with.
Yeah, some way to listen to music.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Kes. That's just a little chance for people to get to know you a little bit more. And going into more detail around your two different diagnosis stories and your diabetes journeys, Tom.
Thank you, my friend. Let's continue chatting to Kes. It feels weird, this Kes.
I know, right?
It's really cool, but it just feels bizarre. So, because we know you so well, so Gary, Mark, Tony, Danny, Claire, I know you're on the panel. So if you do have any questions for Kes throughout tonight's chat, please just feel free to jump on as well. So. Thank you, Tony, for that first section. Obviously, Kes, so you mentioned you were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I think it's important that we start here. And I think it was really interesting as well, your response to that question there, where it says, "What do you not like about diabetes?" And you said the lack of awareness of the different types of diabetes, and I think it's so important to have awareness and knowledge of the different types of diabetes and understand it. And I'm sure we'll talk about it a lot tonight. But please just share with us your journey, I guess, your diagnostic of type 2 diabetes. Like, how did it come about? What symptoms were you sort of feeling? Like, where did it begin? How did you get that diagnostic?
So I think, and this is, and being completely honest, some of it I truly have blocked out because it was so awful.
Yeah.
There are parts of it that I don't really remember.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do remember is feeling tired all the time, having lots and lots of like urine infections, feeling like I could probably drink gallons of water at a time and still be thirsty, which ultimately led to going to the toilet a lot.
Yeah.
Bit of a pattern here, really. But I wasn't living in the area that I'm living in now, and I think I went to my GP 2 or 3 times before I only had a finger prick test, which I thought was interesting, which came back at about 18.
Was that the third time?
Yeah, the third time that I went to the GP.
So when you went the first and second, were you basically going to the GP to say, "Look, I'm not feeling great. I'm really lethargic. I'm weeing a lot. All these sort of things." And what was the response from the GP? What did they say? Was there any?
It was kind of like, you've got a history of anxiety. You're worrying about nothing. It's all in your head. Sort of. That's how it felt to me, anyway.
Wow.
You know.
Gosh.
Kind of see how it goes. And the third time I went back, and anyone who knows me in my current area, and even like Danny, who did the Katie course with me, will know that I do feel it really badly, like emotionally, because for only until recently have I been able to go into a diabetes related appointment and not cry. Which sounds really bizarre, but it's the anxiety of not being listened to.
Of course. Especially when you know something's not quite right, and this is in any way and walk of life, I guess, isn't it? But in that particular instance of going to the GP and going twice and kind of being pushed away, and like that's not good. And when was that, Kes?
Like 20. Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna say I was definitely doing my degree, so 2011 maybe.
Okay, so we're talking like over 10 years ago, and obviously I think, as we know, obviously there's been a big movement with language matter, and there's a lot of movement with stigmas, and hopefully things are improving for the better. But it must be so frustrating to, like, say, be in that position that you're not feeling great, you go to the GP, they kind of half-heartedly say, "Oh, on you go," sort of thing. And I'm so glad that you kept going, even though you were feeling like apprehensive and anxious, and like it must have been so hard. But I'm so pleased that you kept fighting it, because you were seriously ill. Like, and obviously, as we know, later on, you were eventually diagnosed with type 1. And you know what I mean? I'm so glad, because you could have been seriously ill. So when you went that third time, did you say, I want to be finger pricked? Did you have any inkling of diabetes? Did you
No,
know?
I didn't.
Or did
I
they
didn't
offered to say,
really.
right, let's come on,
No.
let's check your finger. Let's see what
Yeah, they just, it was a different doctor. They just did it straight away.
Yeah.
So there was that, and then I started taking metformin,
Right.
which it's, the funny thing is, it seemed to make a difference in the beginning for a little while, and then it made me feel really sick. And the only thing that they kept doing, which didn't make a lot of sense to me, was increase it. So at one point, I can't remember how they measure it. It's like milligrams or something, isn't it? Or micrograms, I don't know. But I was taking 2,000, whatever it was,
Yeah.
of metformin, and then immediately being sick afterwards, which again
Wow.
was put down to the anxiety, which wasn't very
Of
helpful.
course not.
But from there, I kind of started to have issues with pain to my side, pains in my stomach, to the point that I'd had to go to hospital, and then the hospital and the GP referring to this as a mental health episode, and it all being kind of psychosomatic and in my head again.
Wow.
Which was pretty lonely place to be, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not good, not good at all. So it must have been such a hard time. Like, I can't even imagine. So that was obviously 2011. When were you diagnosed with type 1 diabetes? When was that officially confirmed? Like, right, this isn't type 2, this is type 1. What was it, a misdiagnostic, or was it progressed to type 1? I'm not sure 100% how it all works, but what was the wording behind all that?
So I moved county in December of 2018, and in the period that I started seeing my GP surgery in the county I'm in now, to my diagnosis, I lost a ridiculous amount of weight.
Yeah.
In about 4 weeks. I think it was more than like 1.5 stone a week.
Wow.
And I had such bad infections that I could barely walk, and I kind of hobbled into the surgery one day, and the nurse there had been a DSN. And she said, we're going to do these blood tests. Like, I can see you've lost all of this weight. And then it came back. All the tests came back, and she said, I'm surprised you haven't been in hospital with DKA, because I think, this is a misdiagnosis. You're type 1.
And then it was 2019, right? When you were...
Yeah, July 2019.
Wow. So what's that? A good, 8 years. Wow. And can I ask a few questions just following up, really? 2 things.
Yeah.
With type 2, when you were diagnosed with type 2 and obviously had metformin, the question that James's message is, were you taking a metformin on an empty stomach, as this can sort of irritate the tummy? James says that they advise that you take with or after food. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, so kind of with the anxiety, they were pretty good at printing stuff like that on the labels. So
Yeah,
if it said take with or after food, I took with or after
of
food.
course. Yeah.
But yeah, it didn't make an awful lot of difference to how it made me feel, really.
And second of all, like, what support was given to you as a type 2. So when you walked out from that GP after a reading of 18 and you've been prescribed your metformin, what support was given to you in your aftercare? Did you have any technology to check your bloods? Did you have any regular appointments in terms of seeing the nurse or your diabetes team, or was there any support? And these are all things I don't really know, and I'm interested to know, like, was there any care, and is there a care for like your feet, like is for your eyes? Is that as part of the package? I'm not sure, and that's why I want to know, and I don't know if things have changed, but I'm just interested in your life at that time. Did you have any of that service? What was the care for you, Kes?
Well, I don't really know how I was supposed to know if it was getting any better or not, because I couldn't even test my bloods.
And that's just bonkers, isn't it? That is just
seemed to
ridiculous.
Defeat the object, really.
Yeah.
No, I think in that time I had like a yearly checkup with the GP, which meant they would do bloods and maybe urine, and that was it. So that went on for a few years, and then they stopped happening for some reason. It wasn't until I moved back to where I am now. The first appointment I had with the nurse at the surgery, they gave me a blood testing kit. And that, along with obviously the sudden deterioration, led to them concluding it was misdiagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you feel like when you did get that support of having the technology to check your levels, did that help with you and your life and your mental health and anxiety? Did that ease like the burden slightly, rather than not knowing like at all? Like I can't even imagine how that. Yeah, you've got diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and your levels could be high, and here's your medication and things like that, and see you later. And it's like, what? Like, did it release some anxieties? Did it help a little?
Not with the whole type 2 thing. I think with the "you're too young to be a type 2" conversation being one of the first conversations that I'd had with a healthcare professional, that really didn't help. I'd say, if anything, between that time and me moving back to where I live now, my mental health was probably worse than it's ever been.
Yeah. So do you feel in 2019 then, when you were diagnosed type 1, did things change then for your anxieties and mental health? Because then you could maybe understand things a little bit, maybe connect, think, okay, that's why, and then obviously maybe a bit more care was provided.
It sounds really bizarre, maybe, to people who've lived with the condition for a long time, but I actually felt relieved.
Yeah.
To kind of to have an answer. Yeah. And okay, things weren't going to be easy, and they weren't going to be perfect, but at least I knew, like, I felt validated that it wasn't all in my head, and I wasn't mad like people were making out.
Can't believe that. Can't believe people would even say that. Like, it's just madness. It's not right. It makes you really sad, doesn't it? Like, to hear them sort of things. But I like to think things have improved. Like I said, I brought up the language matters and the stigmas and things. I think things are hopefully helping, progressing in care. So when you were diagnosed with type 1 then in 2019 July, how long were you in hospital for, and have you got any sort of stories you'd like to share? Because you've gone from having medication and now you've got insulin that you're taking injections. Have you got any sort of stories that maybe remember from them times?
Well, I was never in hospital.
Oh, okay.
Which I still think, even now, I'm like, how was I not in hospital? Like, I was so unwell, and
Yeah.
even when I was presenting to the hospital, nobody was having the right conversations or thinking outside the box. It was, you've got a history of mental health and anxiety. That's what this is.
What?
There were no additional blood tests. There was no investigations. There was no nothing.
Wow.
And had I ended up in hospital and in DKA, I'm sure my family would be pretty angry about that
Course.
had I not come through it. Luckily, obviously, it's a different story because somebody had eventually had the foresight to, think outside the box a little bit.
And that's why, like you mentioned, them free GP appointments is like, honestly, I like to think GPs, like, you go to a GP and you're presenting with these symptoms of diabetes, that's a simple thing that they can do straight away to help rule things out, or they can go, oh, actually, let's maybe do some further investigations, some bloods or whatever. I think that's something that just needs to, how quick, especially now, it can be done within 5 seconds. Your finger prick, you check your bloods, done. And you hear so many people who you don't get that, or have been in that position. It's really sad and it's really scary, isn't it? Wow. So your first insulins then, injection pens, can you maybe tell us a little bit about the sort of journey that you've gone on then from July 2019 to today? What sort of things
Yeah.
have you used to administer your insulin, the type of insulins, and ways of monitoring your blood glucose levels? What have you used from then to now?
So from diagnosis, so I did this weird thing. I don't know if other people did this, but I was had a saline pen to learn how to inject with. I had an appointment for that. That was interesting.
Wow.
Because I'm
So
I
it
have
wasn't
had a
like, hey,
proper
you're type
issue
1,
with
here's your
needles.
pen and off you go.
No,
I'm
no. So I
surprised
had
on
to go
what
into
you
the
said in,
surgery, and
yeah.
yeah,
I'm surprised of
and
the other bits of your story. You're surprised it didn't just go, hey, there you go. Good luck.
yeah. I mean, different surgery, different county.
Of
To be
course.
fair, so yeah, I had that appointment, and we did all of that. Interestingly, I had a real issue with needles before I was diabetic. Funnily enough, that's not really an issue now. But yeah, I started off with the Humalog Mix 25, which was, I don't know what the ratio is, but it was a mixture of the two insulins. And I think I was doing no more than kind of 5 units at a time for a meal.
Yeah. That's
And
interesting because
then
I don't know a lot about these sort of things, and you know what I mean? And that's why I'm so interested to hear. Is there a reason why
yeah,
they put you on a mixed insulin? Like, is it because you were diagnosed as type 2? Is that because, like, is that because this is 2019, right? And like I said, I don't know
yeah.
the full ins and outs of all this, but like, from what I hear is people normally have like one insulin rather than a mix. Was the reason why you were on that?
So it was partly because what they knew I was traveling out of the country. And we didn't know at that point how much really a unit was going to drop me by. So they kind of set units for correction for meals to see how that went. And then when I came back, it became really clear it was doing naffle really.
Yeah. And
So I
how long were you in Tunisia for?
like 10 days.
Okay.
So I came back, and then I think it was about a week and a half after that, I changed over to Humalog and Abasaglar.
Mhm.
So that was mixed. So the bolus and basal.
There you go, Tony. A basal. I've never heard that. Like, and that's the great thing
Yeah.
about this is you're learning new things. Brilliant. Carry on. Interesting.
Then I had some issues where it felt like the Humalog wasn't acting quick enough, and my basal, I'm trying to get them the right way around now, the Abasaglar, was so high in dosage that we were like, okay, well, maybe we need to just change this.
Mm.
And so then I changed to still on injections, Fiasp and I always get this one wrong. Tresiba?
Tresiba.
Is that right? Yeah, that's the one. That
Yep.
one.
Yeah.
And so while I was doing that during COVID, April, I want to say 2020, I self-funded the Libra
Oh wow.
for 4 months, and then was prescribed Libra 2 after, when it all changed over.
Yes.
Had some real issues with that because it actually increased my anxiety being able to see what was going on. So I think if you're an anxious person, maybe think about that a little bit more before you try it.
And that leads on to my next sort of question. Really, is how did the sort of technology impact your life? Like you're saying then. So you self-funded the Libra, moving on from finger pricking, and for you it maybe created more worries, more anxiety, because I guess you could see it more frequent, and maybe see the trends. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but was that seeing them and worrying maybe?
And then it's that kind of thing of having a target, isn't it? Like a physical green box that you're supposed to fit into somehow.
Yeah.
And if you don't fit in that box, then you're not good enough. Which caused me a real issue for quite a while.
And I remember having conversations with nurses, like this is probably 10 years ago, and sort of kind of saying you need to be here, and them telling me physically this isn't good where you are and you need to be here, and it just makes you feel absolutely rubbish, and no one should say that, and I know things have dramatically improved, but like you say, it's I can see what you mean. Is you're chasing that sort of data, I guess, and you want to be in that green zone, and but what were the pros, do you think, of that particular technology? Were there any for you at that time?
I think with the alarms, it was kind of like, I mean, and I'm massively playing devil's advocate here because there were times where I found it really helpful. There were also times where it led me to micromanage my diabetes. It meant I wasn't sleeping and I felt like I had no quality of life.
Yeah.
Which then led on to the conversations about having the pump. And then in September last year, closed looping with the Guardian 4. And even just having the pump, I actually felt like I had some of my life back.
Yeah. How did you get onto the pump journey? Was that a discussion that you brought up at clinic, or was that something that they brought to you?
Yeah, I did. No, I brought it up, and I had extensive conversations, as Danny will probably agree, on the Katie course about how I'd done that, because it wasn't easy. I went to my GP. They said, "You're not bad enough to warrant this technology."
Here we go
and I
again.
was like, "Oh, here we go again." Yeah, exactly that. So then I went and spoke to a consultant locally who told me, in a nutshell, the same thing without using the word bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's not required, something along those lines. because a lot of my argument was around quality of life, having to make all of those decisions day in, day out, the anxiety, the impact on my relationship with food, my ability to do my job, and all of those things, which actually, as many people will realise, doesn't meet NICE guidelines necessarily, but it does fit ABCD criteria. So me being me, and I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't like this. I don't think I'm quite outspoken. I wrote to PALS and I made a complaint, and outlined all of the reasons why this technology would benefit me, or that at least I should try
What is
to be
PALS?
given the chance. Like a patient advice liaison for the NHS.
Right, okay.
So you kind of the people who give you advice, like when you're making a complaint or you're not happy with something with the NHS.
Yep.
And they managed to get me an appointment with a different consultant who obviously saw that I was distressed, saw that as diabetes related distress, and agreed pump funding. So that was in March 2022.
Brilliant. And just going back over a few little points, really, is it's still saddening to hear the sort of language of your diabetes is not that bad, or it has to be worse for it to be in this potential threshold, or things like that. No one should ever say that to someone in any walk of life of any sort of condition, because they don't know what that person's been living with that condition, whether it's been diagnosed a day, a year, 5 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50, it doesn't matter. And I totally understand and get the recent NICE guidelines and things and criterias. But yeah, I've always said that we're more than numbers and things like that. And I know, for instance, when I go see my consultant in a few weeks' time, we had a conversation about pumps at my last consultation, and I went away, went on the G6, and it's been great. And then I had a letter through the post to say my A1C, and it came back at 54, and I was like totally gobsmacked, actually. However, that is probably because of how it's averaged out between the so highs to lows I'm having, but it doesn't give a full picture, the full identity of that person living with diabetes. Like you said, Kes, day in, day out, the relentlessness of making so many decisions. Gary, we say 180 decisions a day, and like having it, and in all walks of life, in our day job and everything. And I'm so glad that you kept persevering, and you shouldn't have to, Kes. We shouldn't have to be fighting and keep asking and asking. But I'm hoping the direction, like Mark said in our open forum chat at the start, is the work that Partha and people are doing, Emma and all the networking there, is hopefully when we look back in 5 years' time, we'll go, wow, and hopefully we'll be in a position where people can have access and can have that choice, and they can make them decisions and say, look, I want to consider this. Just like your friend before, Danny, you know what I mean? Like, wow. I'm sorry, I've probably gone off on a tangent there.
That's all right.
But yeah, and I'm so glad. And before we go to our next section, is tell us about your pump then. So you said you got that in 2022.
22.
It's coming
March
back to
22.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how has that impacted your quality of life? Like, how does the pump help you in your just everyday? And what are the pros and what are the cons, would you say, if we're looking at both sides of the argument here?
I think so. Initially, I was still using the Libra with the 780, so the Medtronic pump, which is a tubed pump. And to be fair, I've never been bothered by that. I don't find it, like, I use quite a long tube anyway, so I don't find it too much of an issue. It is a little bit annoying sometimes when it comes to clothing, because not all like dresses and stuff have pockets. But you do what you need to do. So yeah, sometimes in terms of how bulky they are, it can be a little bit off-putting, but I'd rather have the benefits of it and it be a bit bulky, I suppose. I didn't have a lot of choice in pump, because I think, like other people have said before, I think Gary said, I think Mark said, I have quite a high insulin usage daily, like total daily.
Right.
So I need the larger reservoir, the three rather than the two.
Of course.
Which meant that I couldn't use Omnipod because it didn't hold enough insulin.
Right. Okay. So your choices in that was reduced, but that was fine, like, because then you can make the right decision for you and your body.
Yeah. I would say even in what I'll call manual, the pump was great, because it meant for the first time ever I could actually eat like difficult foods, like your pizza or your bread, like those sorts of really sometimes tricky carbs.
Yeah.
And I could like dual wave my bolus, or I could square wave it, which is even better because it would do it over a set period of time.
What is dual wave and square wave?
So like a dual wave would be like it would do it in two. A square would be that it would deliver it in four.
Okay.
Like in four different,
rather than
over
one
a period
dose
of time.
you consumed 100 grams of pizza, whatever, rather than one dose, it's 2 or 4 times. Yeah, totally get that. And how good is that, having technology for
it's
it to
amazing.
make them decisions, rather than you, like, maybe back in the day, just okay, here's a pizza, I'll probably inject. And you could make that decision yourself, and you could have split it and decided half here, half there. But having the technology to make these small, like, increment decisions, and it's great. And talking about like closed looping and stuff, is how the technology can help in certain ways to suspend the insulin, so things like that. And that is the future. And how great is that? Because guys, when I inject my insulin, if I have my pizza, like Kes has just said, once I've injected that, say 10, 20 units or whatever, that's in my body, isn't it? Like, whereas the technology is there to help in ways, isn't it? Like, do you want to expand on that a bit?
I think, so I could, like I said, I could split it over, I don't know, let's say, I would often find with pizza, for example, the rise wouldn't come until 2 hours after.
Right.
So I could split it to go over 4 hours.
Yeah.
So that was really good. So I wasn't getting the rises as much. What made it really difficult when I went on to the closed loop with the Guardian 4, you still have quite a lot of control when you're in manual. Like, you're still making decisions.
Yeah.
You're still having to input your carbs. Yes, you've programmed it with all your ratios and all of that, but you're still having to do a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Whereas when I got the Guardian 4 in September, I have never used the phrase so much. I have to try and just sit on my hands and let it do its thing.
Yeah, and I bet, like, seeing it rise and rise and rise, and you think, I want to act, but
I want to
like,
do it. I want
on.
to do
it. But it's kind of having some faith in it, and then I guess if things aren't working the way you want to after a period of time, is you can then make some decisions yourself, isn't it? I guess.
Yeah, I think I don't know what it's like with other pumps. I think one of the difficulties with the Medtronic at the moment is that if you are wanting to do a correction for whatever reason, even if you're in SmartGuard, because it's not working or it's too high or whatever, you can't actually do that unless you come out of SmartGuard and go into manual. you inject yourself, or you I hate the phrase ghost carb.
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of put in carbs where you're not actually eating them.
Eating the carbs.
So yeah.
Wow.
So that is a bit of an issue.
What a journey, Kes. Like, I feel like I've learned so much in this sort of 30 minutes talking to you about your incredible journey. Like Tony said at the start of the chat, is tonight we're having you as our guest speaker. You're part of the hosting team, but I feel like I've learned more about you, more about diabetes in general, and that's what Diabetes Chat is about: is hearing people's stories and hearing beyond people's numbers, A1Cs, and really getting to know people. And it's been great hearing a little bit. So we're going to go to our next section because I am aware of time, and after a month off from like sort of hosting, I've clearly got no time management skills right now. But we've had a great discussion. Tony, I'll bring you in here as well. So our next section is a little bit about Kes and her career as a social worker. And we've got some questions, and I'm sure Kes will lead off on some topics as well. Tony, did you want to come in to ask away with any questions in that main topic, the next section?
Yeah, I mean, I just first wanted to say that, wow, just a lot of what you've said, Kez, is really blown me away. And I think it's really, really important for these types of stories to be discussed. And just well done to you for being so candid and sharing your story like that, which I'm sure probably isn't easy for you to hear that. But yeah, it's been really, really important to have these things discussed like this.
I'm actually just quite impressed that I haven't cried yet, to be fair. So thanks, guys.
No, you're doing a smashing job, and it's been just a fascinating and eye-opening tale. Yeah, a lot of people have spoken about misdiagnosis in the past, and myself have spoken about that as well. And although I wasn't misdiagnosed as type 2, I was misdiagnosed for a few months with other things. But for it to last that long, and for you to sort of come out the other side and be able to sort of speak openly and sort of champion what you do is really amazing. So yeah, I'll move on to the next topic, which was just a bit more about your career and stuff. So at the beginning, when we were sort of given your introduction, we spoke a little bit about how you wanted to be in the Navy. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that sort of your thoughts came about on that and how that changed?
Yeah. So I was a sea cadet. I mean, you were never too far away from the sea where I lived, to be fair. And I got involved with them. I did an awful lot of them. I was away most weekends. I'd spend weeks away. I did my work experience on a Navy base. And I thought, you know what, I could see myself doing this in the future as a job. And unfortunately, I just became more and more unwell, and it became, as I was looking into it, I could see the sorts of illnesses or long-term conditions that would prevent you from joining those types of services. So I had to think about what I was going to do instead, and I've always had a passion for wanting to. It always sounds really like cliche, but help people. And make a difference. And again, being quite blunt, I couldn't afford to be a therapist, so I decided to train as a social worker.
And obviously, this is incredibly personal, so you don't have to share much more if you don't want to. When you say you became increasingly unwell, does this coincide with the initial diagnosis with type 2?
Yeah, it did. And even before that, in terms of, there are certain things to do with mental health that if you'd had previous support, let's say support in that area, it led to further questions being asked. But yeah, it was more around the physically being unwell, and the misdiagnosis.
Right, I see. And you said that obviously you've always wanted to sort of help people, basically. So how did you get specifically into children's social work?
It came from my time in the Sea Cadets. My whole application to become a social worker was based on the volunteering that I did as an adult with the Sea Cadets, building training programs, opening up opportunities to young people in disadvantaged areas, and yeah, it kind of went from there.
And how did your diagnosis change your approach to work?
So I think it definitely gave me more. I mean, I'm a pretty empathetic person anyway, but I think it gave me a real insight. We say to our newly qualified social workers and students that are coming through, you need to consider what it's like to be in that person's shoes and live their life day to day. And actually, being in the position where my whole life had changed with my diagnosis, I was really able to do that much better.
Absolutely, and actually, since I've seen this this question, I've actually been wanting to hear all about this part, about how your diagnosis helped your work.
So I think social workers are nosy. Everyone knows that we're nosy. Like you can't lie about that. We want to know the ins and outs of everything. I think the difficulty is if you're not aware of what diabetes looks like, or if someone's having a low blood sugar or a high blood sugar, that can look like someone's under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And that can be really difficult if you're a social worker, because those things can look the same. And obviously there's consequences for that if you're a parent and you've got a social worker who thinks you're under the influence of drugs and alcohol. So yeah, I've done a lot of education, and linked in with my local paediatric services to look at rolling training out across schools as well, because the amount of time teachers refer to us saying a child is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Well, what if they're not? What if they're diabetic? Has anyone looked at that? And I won't go too much more into that because there was something else a bit later on about that.
That is such a great point, though. I mean, not even just helpful on the diabetes point of view, but just in general, and not judging a book by its cover, and just being open to the fact that people do sort of make subconscious bias when they first look at someone, and being able to break that down and challenge your own sometimes negative perceptions on people. So I think that is such an important point. And I love the fact that it is actually a way that you can turn your type 1 diagnosis into a positive, because you can understand things like, sometimes people who are maybe suffering with DKA or something might actually have a certain appearance that other people might perceive as something else. So that's such an important thing. So we're going to move on to a section on stigma a little bit now. So what are your thoughts on stigmas attached to diabetes, specifically around your role as a social worker?
Well, I think so. I was diagnosed obviously just before COVID really messed things up for everyone. And what I found really hard was that without anyone really knowing anything about my condition or about me, I was told, you're not allowed to come into the office. You're clinically extremely vulnerable. You need to go home. It wasn't a discussion. It wasn't a question. It was this is what's happening. And I think that could have been handled differently. I think it should have been a discussion. There's, not everyone who is living with any form of diabetes or long-term condition is going to be as vulnerable as the next person. And actually, there were a lot of factors at the time that meant that I wasn't seen as being clinically extremely vulnerable. And that actually left some of my families that I was working with vulnerable because I wasn't able to go and see them, which is ironic, really. So yeah, that was a big one for me. It's like, have the discussion, don't just assume. And I think that's not just diabetes or any long-term condition, that's social work as well. Like, if you don't know something, speak to someone about it.
Absolutely, always see the person, not the disability or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we tackle stigmas, and what do you believe the role of the community is to reduce stigma?
I think a lot of it's education. And I know not everyone wants to talk about their experiences, and that's fine, but there are people out there who can speak about their experiences and should be doing that. Um, I think we've all probably been through situations with the diagnosis or in work where certain assumptions are made about us, and the only way to change those assumptions and kind of negative comments or thoughts is to tell people, not in a nasty way, but educate them as to why they're wrong. And I think I always say, like, for me, social work is very much like diabetes. Unless you're living with it, unless you're part of it, it's really misunderstood. And I think my role as a social worker and as someone living with type 1 diabetes, it's my job to prove to the general population that, one, diabetes isn't going to stop me from doing anything that I want to do, and two, being a social worker doesn't automatically mean that you have to hate me or that your family's not going to stay together, because that's not the case.
Yeah, sort of challenging stigmas and sort of all facets there. And I think people should sort of be open. It's something I try to live my own life by, is be open to the fact that you don't actually know everything about everything there is to know, and be open to the fact that I won't always be correct, and to listen to people when they want to share their experiences on something.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the diabetic label?
I don't really know. I was thinking about this earlier, actually, because I still don't know what I would say. I know there's been a lot of discussion about, are you a type 1 diabetic? Do you live with diabetes? Are you a person with diabetes? For me, I don't really care, as long as people aren't being mean. I don't see it as being any different as someone saying that I'm a social worker. It's part of who I am. Would I prefer to think that diabetes lives with me rather than me living with it? Yeah, probably. I think someone said before, it's like a border that doesn't pay any rent, but it's there, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yes, I like that one. That's a good one. Okay, Tom. How are we doing for time? I don't want to. I'm really enjoying this conversation we're having with kids. There's so many more things I want to chat about. Are we okay for time?
Yeah, I'm doing absolutely fine. So there was two sort of other points that I know Kes wanted to look at, wasn't it, Kes? So them last 2 points, maybe, Tony. You can maybe bring that up.
Yeah. So about sort of what social work services need for working with children with diabetes.
Yeah, so I think we had this unfortunate habit of we had a spate of young people who were referred into social work services because they were type 1 diabetic. And I was a bit like, I'm not really seeing the safeguarding issue here, if I'm honest. You know, where someone chooses to receive their treatment from, whether that's within the UK or outside of the UK, isn't necessarily a safeguarding issue as long as they're receiving it. But what I would say is that meant that I ended up with, and this isn't in my recent role, but I ended up with children, just dealing with children who were living with type 1, which is difficult for me because I didn't want it to become my whole life. So I think there was something there around, you know, educating people. Again, no different to being a social worker when we educate our social work students and newly qualified about the impact of drug use, the impact of domestic abuse, the impact of mental health. And I'm not saying in any great depth, but just, you know, what to look out for. Because as we said before, you know, the so signs and symptoms like losing weight doesn't necessarily mean you've got an eating disorder. Looking like you're drunk or taking drugs, that might not be the case. Some side effects of drugs might be drinking loads. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that that person's taking drugs. You know, there could be other explanations, and it could be that they're really unwell. So one of the things that I did locally is contact our local pediatrics team, and I said, I think we need to do some training around this in our schools with our social workers, with you guys, about what actually is a safeguarding concern, so that we're all on the same page. And then, let's put it bluntly, the elephant in the room, you know, we end up with less serious case reviews where health needs are not being met because people have more awareness around it. And we're all working together to kind of address those issues.
I think it's really interesting what you were saying about, I mean, if I'm following correctly, like you sort of became like the named person, if you like, to deal with all things
Yeah,
diabetes. Is that right?
yeah,
I mean, that
yeah.
must have been really tough to sort of, you know, you're living it in your day-to-day life, and then, you know, sometimes people like to have a bit of separation between their personal life and work life, and you can't do that with diabetes. But then you're also working that as well. That must have been really full on.
And I think, yeah, and I think for me, because I then wanted to say um to people, you know, do this. Well, I can't give medical advice. Like, I'm not allowed to do that. So that was really difficult for me because whilst it might have been good advice, it could have also got me into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's get one more topic to discuss on the sort of main topic of your sort of career and stuff like that. Um, is around the cost of living crisis and how that is impacting
Mm,
families and those living with diabetes.
yeah. I think there's certainly in the area where I'm working, there's been increased concerns around developing type 2 diabetes. Um, we've had a lot of conversations about families who are not able to afford what we would probably consider nutritious food. You know, to ensure that they and their children are having a balanced diet, and this is leading to things like iron deficiency, and things like that. I guess what we were kind of talking about and what we're exploring more at the moment is, yes, our paediatric services are supporting our type 1 diabetic young people, but what are we doing in terms of preventing children who are at risk or have a family history of type 2 going forwards, given that we're in this cost of living crisis where, you know, we're struggling. we're struggling to put the nutrition on the table, we're going for the easier options that aren't necessarily as healthy. So I think that's kind of where I'm at the moment, and the things that we're thinking about with our local teams.
Yeah, and they're all obviously really, really important things that people shouldn't forget about. Are you happy to sort of to chat a bit more about sort of mental health, and sort of continue into that section?
Mm-hmm.
So one thing we always like to sort of just touch on mental health and that aspect on diabetes as well. So what does the sort of term mental health mean to you, just in general?
I think at a real basic level, it's everything, isn't it? It's your general well-being, how you're feeling emotionally. I'm a great believer in actually how you're feeling emotionally will impact how you're feeling physically as well. So I think there's a lot to be said in terms of the links between mental health, your physical, how you're physically feeling, your quality of life. Yeah, it's everything for me, really.
And obviously, just as important as just sort of talking about mental health and what it actually means is sort of taking a sort of holistic view around that, and sort of what you can do to improve it. And do you have any sort of techniques? Obviously, something that everyone should focus on, the mental health. But is there any sort of specific things that you do to improve your mental health?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love photography, so that's something that I find. I think we had a chat on Monday last week where we talked about ADHD as well, which is something that I'm looking into. But I find that when I become overwhelmed with people and diabetes at the same time, things become really difficult. Photography is the one thing that I can do on my own, that I can just go out and do and lose myself in and not care about. So that's my go-to. But also being able to, I think I said before, during COVID, I found Diabetes 101 on Twitter, and then that led to GB Doc, and then you guys as well, Diabetes Chat. And the community's been massive in terms of mental health support.
Oh, absolutely. I think that the diabetes community is such an amazing community. But we're sort of everywhere online,
Yeah.
and it's just as far as sort of these sort of groups go. I just think it's such a great bunch of people. Everyone is so ready to help anyone and in any way that they can. Everyone is always so present. It is such an excellent community.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
It's I don't think I've met another quite like it, to be fair.
so that actually leads really, really nicely into sort of peer support, and why it is so important. Do you want to sort of discuss that a little bit more, like what your views are on peer support and how important that is?
Yeah. I think, like I said before, like with the social work bit and not wanting to give medical advice, I don't think that's why people generally look for peer support. I think it's just that understanding that whilst we all deal with things differently, we all, manage our diabetes differently. We all know what a rubbish day feels like and looks like, regardless of how we get there. And I think actually being able to reach out to someone who can go, yeah, do you know what? It is rubbish. And actually you genuinely know that they know what that feels like. There's nothing quite like it.
It's having people in the same boat, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
can just talk to or ask questions or lean on or rant to or whatever. Because otherwise, if you don't have the people, the peer support, whatever, and people may not choose not to have it, but it can feel quite lonely, or that's how I certainly felt. You feel really isolated,
Yeah.
as if you're in the ocean on your own boat. And I
Yeah.
guess it's been in sort of Noah's Ark, isn't it? And you've got your companions, you've got your people.
Yeah. And like, actually, I don't think anyone, I know I've said about the negative, but let's talk about the positive as well. No one else, like you get 100% time in range, for example. Let's talk about, like, nobody else is going to understand how great that feels quite the same as someone who's already living, like you said, in the same boat. Or what it feels like when you do exactly the same thing the next day and you're at like 2%. And how that feels. But, you know, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I remember saying on the diabetes chat before that one of the things about peer support that I really like is being able to speak our own language. And you can say that to me, and I will understand what that means. But if you were to stop any random person in the street or a random colleague and discuss that, it wouldn't register as a thing. They wouldn't understand at all. And sometimes being able to just speak your own language is so important, and it means so much just to have someone to be able to share those things with who will actually understand why that matters to you and why that is so important. It's such a big deal.
Definitely. Well, look what we did earlier in the half hour before we started. You know, Danny contacted me and said, "Oh, got some really good news. Need some advice." And I was like, "Come and join us. Danny's here. She's joined us. She's got the advice, and we've got a new person in the community. How great!" Like, it's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. That is exactly what it's all about, isn't it? That is exactly it. And just to sort of round this up, and sort of tie up in a nice little bow, what are your hopes and aspirations for yourself, as well as just diabetes care and management in general? Just general hopes and aspirations for the future.
I think for me, I'm on a little bit of a mission at the moment to build links between diabetes health professionals and social work services. So that I will continue to do because it's something that I'm really passionate about. But my hope for the future generally would be that there is much improved access to mental health support, eating disorder support or disordered eating support, and more equality and consistency around that across the different regions of the UK.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kes.
It's all right.
Tom, was there anything else you wanted to add?
What a chat. Like, really, that was superb, Kes. I've literally just enjoyed every second of that. And we've only known each other really since like end of November, early December. And you're such a fantastic person. And tonight we've got a bit of a more insight into your career and how you are helping people and young children and families and all types of diabetes. So honestly, really remarkable chat tonight. Thank you so much for your time and being our guest tonight.
Thanks.